I've played a lot of survival games over the years, and whenever I see a new one, I'm kind of like, okay, what's this one doing differently that's going to set it apart? And is there going to be any progression, or am I just surviving? But Light of Motiram seems to have everything I like combined into a co-op open world survival game. We've got these giant mech animals, and apparently there's over 100 of them that you can not only battle, but you can also tame them to help you out with boss fights, use them as mounts to get around the open world, and even take their technology to advance your own gear and customize your own mechs. As for the bosses themselves, and I always feel like the combat is usually lacking in survival game, but here we have Souls-like combat with parrying, dodging, and weapons that actually have weight to their attacks. You have execution moves, stealth takedowns, you can even climb up the bosses and mount onto them, which is awesome. There's also going to be a gear progression system and a huge open world to explore, with different weather systems and biomes. And then obviously we have the survival elements, like mining, wood cutting, physics-based base building with load-bearing structures, and all of this can be done in co-op. And they actually gave me a bunch of new information about the game, along with some new gameplay to check out, and they sponsored me to break down what we see here. So if you like what you see, you can go ahead and wishlist Light of Motiram on Steam and the Epic Store from the link below. But before we get into the physics-based base building and other survival elements like mining, crafting, and so on, we need to talk about this open world. It's going to have a diverse range of biomes to explore, everything from huge open grasslands, deep-rooted forests, unforgiving desert sand dunes, and snow-capped mountains. And you'll have a reason to explore these different biomes because each one is going to be home to mysterious ruins where you can discover new technologies to progress your tech and get more powerful. And in the world of Light of Motiram, each environment is going to come with its own unpredictable weather, like desert sandstorms, mountain blizzards, and rain. This means you're dealing with hypothermia in the cold, while getting soaked in the rain is going to put you at greater risk of being electrocuted by robots. There's apparently over 100 authentic mechanics ranging from falling trees to needing to ventilate the smoke from the fire in your house. And to me, it's the little details like this that really take survival games to the next level. But the real threat is going to be these lurking mech animals that have adapted to their environment long before you ever set foot there. And we see evidence of this in the gameplay, with the bosses creating ice fissures on the frozen lakes, kicking up snow around you, or firing icy missiles and then creating shields formed from the ice. It really looks like each biome is going to offer its own adapted threats and technology. And this kind of progression is really exciting to me. Each place actually having its own identity and something new to add to our toolkit. What actually stood out to me the most was that as we battle and tame these mech creatures, you'll be able to use them to traverse the open world of Motiram. We see a group of friends flying over the desert region on dragonfly-like mechs that they've tamed. These same dragonfly creatures can also adapt to the water as well, and I can see in these animations and design that clearly a lot of thought and effort has been put into how these creatures actually move through the environment, like this rolling contraption speeding over the sand dunes, building up some kind of electric charge that looks like it can be discharged to damage nearby enemies, or this mounted character on a mech horse in the shadow of a colossal creature that I guess we're fighting. Very early on though, we can also get gliders just made out of wood and hide and use them to traverse from height. But later on, you'll be unlocking these speed rings, which boost us much longer distances through the open world. Interestingly, we do see a building mechanic where the player is literally building a ladder up a vertical mountain as they climb, which allows us to access this hidden cave. So it looks like this open world is going to be very accessible to the player, and hopefully we'll be finding these hidden little details all over the place. But what was quite jaw-dropping to me was honestly the contrast of taking the raft across a lake versus the ocean. Hunting this giant mecha wave serpent, it genuinely looks terrifying. Now, like I said before, Light of Motiram has over 100 mech animals that can be tamed, mounted, and even summoned into combat. They're also customizable as well. We can actually see one flying with mounted turrets on it. And you'll be able to unlock unique skills and growth for each mech animal to personalize them for production reasons or into your ultimate combat ally. And obviously, as you unlock more tech, your options are only going to expand. And imagine then once you have like your co-op partners in the game, each with their own mechs that are customized to whatever they want, it's going to get super interesting to take on these colossal bosses. And in that sense, I can definitely see a feeling of progress from starting from these primitive beginnings to becoming a mech warrior, riding a flying mech being super satisfying. Now, one thing I can see from looking at the gameplay of Light of Motiram is that they clearly spend time on the combat and gear customization. The game features precise physics-based dodging and collisions. This is evident because we can see this character actually jump over some of the boss's attacks, and the hitbox is exactly where it should be, allowing you to do stuff like this. You can also get shields to block and even counterattack. It really seems to be a Souls-like combat system, which is really impressive to find in a survival game where combat is usually pretty average at best. Not to mention, on top of this good-looking core combat system, we have our mech beasts to aid us in battle as well. There also seems to be a lot of weapon diversity, each with its own attack patterns. We actually get to see a fast attacking sword and shield, and also a shield and one-handed axe, which is obviously quite a contrast when you compare it to the much slower and harder hitting two-handed hammer. It looks very weighty and deliberate in its animations, and I'm sure it's going to be much easier to knock enemies off balance using this weapon. And beyond that, we get to see torches used to light our way, and I did see a bow and arrow in the gameplay, and then this character had some kind of like heavy gun on his arm, which looks really interesting. Now, when you actually do parry attacks, you get this weak spot kill move opportunity, which is really satisfying to see. This seems to even have unique interactions with certain bosses, like this one here. We actually get to use its own gun against it, which is crazy. There's also mounting mechanics, so you can actually climb up on top of the boss and attack its weak points. We see the mech creature's shielded legs even responding to the impact of your attacks too. So overall, what I've seen so far, this combat system looks super responsive. And like I said, most survival games have pretty mediocre combat, but here we are with weapon choices, attack patterns, mounting, parrying, and it's obviously all in co-op. So really, this ticks a lot of boxes for me, and I can't wait to see how it actually feels to play. Now, I've not been told much about the gear progression system, but it's evident from the gameplay that each biome has its own sets of gear to craft. It does seem to combine natural things like fur and feathers found in nature with the mechanical robotic elements of the creatures you'll be killing. Now, I really like it when there's a visual gear progression system that gives you a reason to defeat each mechanical animal to progress to crafting the next armor set and the better weapons so you can take on those bigger threats, especially when the gear has elements of tech from what you've defeated. And of course, this gear keeps you warm depending what environment you're in, because the game has a temperature system. But obviously, before we can build our base, we need to talk about the resource gathering mechanics in Light of Motiram. It's exactly what you'd expect early on. You start quite primitively in the woodland region. You can cut down trees. There's obviously physics to falling logs, and we can see them hitting other trees that also begin to fall afterwards. I'm sure I'm going to die to these falling trees as well at some point. We can also mine iron near the river here, and we also get to see our character fishing. So all of the basic survival gathering mechanics are here, and I assume that this is going to scale throughout the open world. You'll find other better resources to mine and so on. The game isn't just based around combat. It very much has those survival elements in it too, like eating, staying warm, crafting, and building your base. Speaking of, after you've gathered some resources, we can now build our shelter. Now, early on, this comes in the form of log cabins with thatched roofs, and these structures look very natural in their environment. We see wall-mounted torches and other customizable things you can place like chairs, beds, and so on. You're even able to raise livestock for food, and you'll have cooking and crafting stations for improving your gear and weapons. Now, survival mechanics-wise, your home will provide warmth and shelter, and you actually need to ventilate your fire indoors so you don't get smothered by the smoke, because the game has a proper ventilation mechanic. Also, the base building itself relies on a realistic load-bearing system. So you can't just have like a floating roof with one support. You've actually got to have supports in place that make sense. Otherwise, it will just fall down. I also love that we get to see the trophies of the other bosses we've defeated so far on the walls. And there's lots of mech elements we don't really understand yet, but we see some of the bosses we defeat getting scanned, and I assume that's how we kind of extract the information from them. As for the co-op aspect, you can team up with other players to take on bosses, construct bases, and gather resources. Literally everything you do in the open world, you can just have other friends jump in and play the game with you. They can bring over their tamed mech animals, and you can all fly over the map together, which looks incredible. And open world survival games are always great with friends. Each person kind of has their own role, and then you come together and it just makes it really fun. Especially when you have a goal of like defeating the next boss or finishing the base and so on. But for solo players out there, it actually looks like the bosses are designed to be soloed as well. So I'm glad the game's been designed with that in mind. Your friends will also be able to jump in at any time, joining in your adventure without interrupting your progress, which is great to hear. Now, whenever I see a new survival game, I always ask myself, what is this survival game trying to do differently? And I think these huge mecha boss monsters roaming around different biomes in this huge open world is going to give me a reason to carry on playing, exploring, and progressing, to want to defeat and find all of these bosses, to also like upgrade my own mech with new skills and progression. And then you've obviously got the classic, you know, gear progression and weapons and unique combat system on top of that. It just seems like it combines so many elements that I personally really enjoy about survival games. To me, Light of Motiram has a reason that you'd want to survive and progress. And it's definitely one of those games where the gameplay makes me way more excited than the CGI trailer, which is always a good thing. But what do you guys think about Light of Motiram? I would love to see some mech taming gameplay next, and even some more base building to learn more about how the survival elements and progression is going to be. And obviously get hands-on with that combat at some point. If it feels as good as it looks, it's going to be great. And you can wishlist it on Steam and Epic from the link below in the description.